Okay, so I'm going to record the lesson also so that I can post it on Canvas. So if you ever need to go back and actually watch some pieces, that might be a little easier for some of you. Those of you at home, if you do not have that sheet that I just held up, don't worry about it. It will all be posted on Canvas anyway, and you can take some notes in your notebook about it. It's okay if you don't have it, because you weren't in school, or you'll be fine. Okay, so I would say writing algebraic expressions is one of the harder things for 7th graders, because it's not like computing. You're not figuring out an answer. You're just translating from words to symbols, okay? So first of all, we have to know, oh, that's really blurry, but it's okay. This is what's on the sheet in front of you, that green sheet that I held up. So we have to come up with some words or phrases that represent, let's start with addition. How do we say addition? If we're speaking, I'll give you one. We could say plus. Because that's one way that we could say it. What's another way we can say addition? So we might say plus. T.
Added by.
Added, or added by, or added to, any of those. Okay, so I want you to write these down. What's another one? Can you think of any others? Ready? Add. We could just say add. Any others you can think of? Like if I gave you the expression 3 plus 2, I could say 3 plus 2, 3 added to 2, 3 add 2. What else could we say? Can you think of any others? What do we call the answer to an addition problem? It starts with an S. If you know at home, you can type it in. Go ahead. The sum. So we could say the sum of 3 and 2. Okay, and there's one more that I'm thinking of, and that would be increased by 3 increased by 2. Actually, I have one more that we can put on there. How about more than? 2 more than 3, or 3 more than 2. Okay, so those are all phrases we could use. Okay, that's coming back to the wrong class again. Hang on a second. Let's see. Hannah, can you unmute yourself for a minute? I can't hear you. There we go. Can you unmute again? What do you... Yeah, okay. You can leave and go to your correct class, which would be whatever your second hour class is. Okay, so then let's move on to subtraction. If we see a problem like 7... How could we read that? What words would we use for subtraction? That's probably the easiest one. Brady. Minus. 7 minus 5. Okay, give me another word or phrase. T.
Subtracted by.
Subtracted by. I see that at home Derek said decreased. Absolutely. Or decreased by. Because when we added, we had increased by, so subtracting, decreased by. When we add, we said more than, Subtract would be less than. So when I put less than up here, I'm gonna circle that because we have to be really careful when we use the words less than. If this was the problem, would you say 7 less than 5 or 5 less than 7? Which way would you say it? 7 less than 5 or 5 less than 7? Brady?
5 less than 7.
Yeah. So if I were to read this and I'm using the words less than, it's always the opposite order, which gets kind of tricky. So be careful with the words less than. What do we call the answer to a subtraction problem? Remember? Starts with a D. Georgia. The difference. And we could just say subtract. Okay, any others there that you can think of? I think we've got them. Yeah, go ahead. Take away, absolutely. Kind of forgot about that one. Like back in elementary school when we do subtraction, we always talk about take away. Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on to the next ones. The next ones are multiplying and dividing. Let's start with multiplying. There's more for multiplying than there is dividing, so let's start with multiplication. What words could we use for multiply? Go ahead, Kate.
Multiply.
Multiply, or multiply by. I'm going to put multiply by. So if the problem was 7 multiplied by 3. Okay, go ahead, Brady. Times. What do we call the answer to a multiplication problem? It starts with a P. Go ahead, Brady. Product. So we could say the product of 7 and 3. Okay, then there are some that I'm going to put up here that are specific to a certain number. If you're multiplying by 2, what's another way to say multiplying by 2? Double. So that would be specific just to 2, but if you're doubling something, you're multiplying by 2. If you're tripling, so double, triple, we could say twice the amount. That would be another one that's just a 2. So those would be specific to a certain number, but they still mean multiplying. Okay? All right, then division. There's only a couple for division. Go ahead.
Quotient.
Quotient. So if it was 12 and 4, the quotient of 12 and 4 would be 3, right? Go ahead. Divided by. That's about all I have to divide. There's really only a couple ways to say divide. Okay, then we have 2 more. An equal sign. Obviously, we can say equals because that's what we say a lot. But the other word that we use a lot for equals,
Same.
we could use same. There's actually a different one that I'm thinking of that your textbook would use a lot, or math classes would use a lot, and that's just the word is. Okay, if you saw 7 plus 3 equals 10, you could say the sum of 7 and 3 is 10. So the equal sign would be the word is. Okay, and then we have grouping symbols. Okay, we have to know when grouping symbols are used, and a lot of times we might not need them. But if we're going to use grouping symbols, there's a certain way we should say it. Okay, if I had a problem that looked like this, I would not, technically, I should not read it 4 parentheses 7 plus 3 parentheses. That's not right. That's not correct mathematical language. Okay, now I do read it that way sometimes when I'm saying it in class. But technically, this should be said 4 times the sum of 7 and 3. Okay, so anytime you see parentheses, you're going to use these phrases. The sum of, or the difference of, or the product of, or the quotient of. Okay, so one of those 4 phrases. Now, just because you use those phrases doesn't mean you have to use parentheses. If I say the product of 7 and 4, well, that's just 7 times 4. Do I have to put parentheses around that? No, because that's all that's there. I could. Is it wrong if I put parentheses there? Does it change the answer? No. But keep in mind, if it's not necessary to have them there, then don't put them there. Okay? When we have a phrase like this, whoa. You see that? Crazy magic going on here. When it looks like this, if I don't put the parentheses there, then it means something different. Right? If I said 4 times the sum of 7 and 3, and I wrote it just like that, that means something different. Why? Brady?
Because you have to do multiplication first.
Yeah, because that would tell me to multiply first and then add the 3. If I put the parentheses there, I'm adding the 3 and then multiplying. So we have to be really careful with that part of it. Okay? So on your homework today, you're going to see things like this, where you have to write an expression for the word phrase. So I'm going to give you a phrase, and you have to write it out. The product of 8 and a number n. What would that look like? The product of 8 and a number n would just be 8n. Okay. Now, would it be okay to write 8 times n? 8.n? Would that be okay? Absolutely, you guys. That's totally fine. However, it's not necessary to have the dot there. If you put a letter and a number right next to each other, that means multiplying. Okay? Questions there? Okay, so what do you think we'd write for number 2? 9 less than a number w. Write it in your notes, or those of you at home, type it in the chat what you think you would write. 9 less than a number w. Okay, and right now I'm seeing this. Or I am also seeing this one written. In this case, it can't be both of them. Which one is it? This is where that less than, remember when we wrote less than down, we said you have to be careful. Brady?
W minus 9.
It's the w minus 9. Okay, so it's not this one. Because it says 9 less than, we're taking the 9 away from the w. So it has to be w minus 9. Now when you type this in your homework, you guys, use lowercase letters. Okay, I'll look through everything too. So if you think something was right and You typed it wrong. I'll correct that. Okay, number 3. 3 increased by the difference of p and 5. Okay, well, as I read this, I see 3 increased by means what? Adding. So that's just going to be a plus. What does the difference of mean? Subtracting, but with parentheses. So I'm really subtracting those two things. So we have 3 plus, and then in parentheses, p minus 5. So 3 plus the difference of p minus 5. Okay, what do you think you'd write for number 4? 24 decreased by the product of 6 and p. What does decrease by mean? Shout out.
Subtraction.
Subtract. So this is just subtracting. Now, if you say decrease by, it's not like less than. You don't have to switch the order. The only time you have to switch the order is with less than. Decrease by stays the same. So it's 24 minus what?
6 times Q.
6 times Q. You can just write 6Q. You don't have to put a time sign between the 6 and the Q, because that just means to multiply. Do I have to put parentheses around the 6 and the Q? Could I? You could. How come I don't have to in this case? T.
Because you would just do multiplication first.
Yeah, you would do it first anyway. But if you wrote it like this, that'd be okay. It's not wrong. Okay? All right, last one like this. 8 less than the quotient of 3 and h. So because we see the words less than, hopefully we know less than means minus, that's subtraction. But when you see less than, what does that mean? That you have to switch the order. So that minus 8 has to come at the end. Okay, and there's going to be something in front of it. What goes in front of it? T.
3 divided by h.
3 divided by h. Now, there's a few ways we can write that. Okay, you could write it like this. You could write it, and when you're typing it in your homework, this symbol, this division symbol, let me try this again. 3 divided by h minus 8. You're not going to have the choice of this symbol. Your keyboard doesn't have that symbol on it. What would you use instead? Lizzie?
Slash.
Yeah, so you would just do 3/h minus 8. You could put parentheses around that. That's okay. They don't have to be there because you would do the division first anyway, but they could be. Questions there? Okay, last thing we're going to do with this is translate it into words. You guys, there's so many different ways to write these. There's going to be lots of possible answers on your homework. You're just typing it out as you would read it. Now, you can't just say 7n. What does 7n mean? Go ahead, Brady.
7 times n.
So one way we could write that is 7 times n. What's another way we could write it? T.
7 multiplied by n.
7 multiplied by n. Can anybody think of a third way we could write that? Go ahead, Brady.
The product of 7 and n.
Good. The product of 7 and n. How many ways do you think I want you to write it on your homework? Just one. You have to come up with one way. So if the easiest way for you is 7 times n, that's fine. I don't care which way, you just need one. Okay, so you don't have to write it all 3 ways. So what would we say for number 7? I know how I would write it the easiest way. Go ahead, T.
9 minus 3 times C.
Yeah, 9 minus 3 times C. To me, that's the easiest. There's other ways to do this. Anybody think of another one? Go ahead, Brady.
The product of 3C less than 9.
Perfect. So he wanted to use the words less than, so he knew the order had to switch. So you could say the product of 3 and C less than 9. So that's another way we can say that. Okay, last one. It's the quickest, easiest way, Raylan.
56 times P plus 92.
Absolutely. 56 times G plus 92. Or 56 times G increased by 92. So instead of plus, we could have put increased by or added to. Okay, so there's other words we could use there. Questions, you guys, with that? Okay, so that is that part of the notes.